different documents. The first thing that I want to talk about is a concept that we use called building blocks. And as I mentioned last week, we worked on creating your sales message, which was at the most simple level. It was going through these different categories and brainstorming a handful of bullet points of key things to talk about. Key things to talk about regarding your product, identifying the different target buyer types that you're going after, a few benefits, a few pain points, a few questions to ask, maybe a few customer examples. So we're just brainstorming and organizing our thoughts in those different areas. And so what that can look like is what we typically probably would come up with going through that process are individual points. So individual product points, individual value points, individual pain points, individual questions. And that's what we would have come up with if you would have gone through the process that we recommended. Now what we can do is we can take all those points and we can put them together to create what we call building blocks. So we can take your individual product points, such as your differentiation and key details about your product, and we can create a building block for your product and for all the things that you should talk about regarding your product. We can create a building block for your value, for your pain points and whatnot. I'll show you what those individual blocks look like, but the key thing here is that if you have those blocks, then it's extremely easy to take those blocks, and in the same way that you would build a house or build something out of raw materials, we can use those raw materials of building blocks to create all of your different scripts and emails and voicemails, and I'm basically going to show you what that looks like. The first thing I want to do is show you what the building blocks that we have to work with look like, and then we'll show you how to put those together. So I'm just going to flip through the building blocks that we can put together based on the sales message that we created last week. So the first building block is a product building block, and these are things that you can put into that building block. But by the way, I'm going to show you different building blocks. You don't have to use these exactly, and this is just a starting place, right? So from what I have through the process that we used last week, these are different things that we can talk about regarding your product. This is what you sell. These are the features. These are the benefits. This is how you differ. These are some impacts if someone doesn't purchase your product. These are some bragging points about your company. Your building block for your product might look different. Maybe use this structure exactly as is, but this is an example of what your product building block can either look like or a starting place of what you can build on. You have a value points building block, which is we help insert your target buyer for your particular message, value point 1, 2, 3. So for example, if you're creating a message that is for chief financial officers, we help chief financial officers to access their financial data in real time on any web-connected device. That's an example of your value points block. We can use your pain points to create a pain points building block. When I talk with other chief financial CFOs, I know that they often have challenges with it's difficult and time-consuming to reconcile the quarterly reports. It's difficult to communicate with all the different stakeholders. Are you having any challenges with those? Are you concerned about any of those challenges? That's a pain points building block. By the way, as I'm showing you these building blocks, these are going to serve a couple purposes. The main purpose is we're going to be able to mix and match all these blocks to create a bunch of documents. I'm going to show you that in a minute. The other thing is that when you really start to get your hands around this can also change the way you think. So instead of, when you're talking to a prospect, instead of trying to think of the individual point that you need to say, you can actually start to think, okay, this is where I need to talk about my value points building block, or this is where I need to talk about my value points. And you can start to think of your message in block format, and that makes it really easy for you to shift, to identify what to talk about and to shift from one topic to another. Let's go through more of your building blocks. So we can take your pain questions that we came up with, And that's a building block of the different questions you can ask to look for pain points. We can take your name drop that we helped you to create last week and help you to create your name drop building block. Now, those are all building blocks that you can create from your sales message that we helped you to create. We're also going to give you some building blocks that we've created for you that basically work for almost every salesperson. So these are just kind of standard building blocks that don't really change from one salesperson to another, although you could modify these specifically for your situation. But they're generic and standard questions that apply to most situations. But I'm a firm believer in there's certain current environment questions that you should ask. And these are basically questions to identify what is the prospect doing in the particular area where you have something to sell or something to offer. So these are like, what are you using today? How long have you been with them? How's it going? What do you like? What don't you like? So these are your current environment questions. And of course, for your particular product, you could probably modify or add a couple. There's also qualifying questions that you can ask, and I divide qualifying questions into 4 categories. So you have need versus want. These are some questions that you could ask to probe to see if your prospect genuinely needs what you have or if it's more of a want. You should find out if your prospect has the ability to spend, has money to spend and the financial ability to purchase from you. And here are some funding availability questions. Here are 2 more categories of qualifying questions. Decision authority, so these probe to see how much decision-making power your prospect has. Level of competition questions. By the way, I'm showing you scripts and questions here today. When we get to level 3, we're going to go into all of these topics in more detail. So for example, I'm showing you qualifying questions here. I'm just showing you the questions. I'm not really explaining them. When we get to level 3, there will be 1 week that we will go through qualifying alone. That will be the only topic for a whole week, and we'll talk about these categories of questions and these questions in detail. I'm just showing you the building block at this point. Sales takeaway. So here are some examples of ways to take away to do a takeaway on a cold call or in a meeting. And you wouldn't say all of these, but here's some different options, and this is a building block. Closing questions. Here are some trial closing, soft closing, and hard closing questions. Some meeting warm-up questions. So these are questions you can use when meeting with a prospect. And here are some networking questions.